Tuo fratello ha una testa umana nascosta in una sacca per le palle da bowling. Cosa fai? Cosa fai, Simo? Un'inquietante opera sulla trasmissione e trasformazione del male. Cosa vuol dire vivere con un serial killer? Quali sono le cause che hanno scatenato in lui la violenza? I film horror forse? O qualcosa di ben peggiore? Tutte le risposte in Found ed Headless di Scott Skirmer e Arthur Cullipher. Buongiorno a tutti e bentornati a Cinema degli Eccessi. Found ed Headless sono due film che mi avete chiesto tante volte nel corso degli anni, a cui io voglio un gran bene nonostante le limitazioni tecniche, diciamo, sono opere low budget, dirette anche senza troppa tecnica, ma qui sguazziamo nelle imperfezioni, soprattutto se traspare un'onesta passione per la settima arte e qui in particolar modo per l'orrore. Ma la passione non basta, certo, e ciò che rende grandi queste piccole opere sono la storia e la capacità di affrontare determinati argomenti. Non che sia Zulawski, ma ciò che i film vogliono trasmettere lo trasmettono molto bene. Come abbiamo detto, Found è un film su un giovanissimo appassionato di horror, Marty, il cui fratello maggiore Steve, altrettanto appassionato di horror e di musica metal, ama decapitare delle ragazze di colore ispirato dal razzismo del padre. Fondamentale per la consapevolezza di Marty è la visione di un film in cui il killer compie le stesse nefandezze di Steve. Il film in questione è Headless e 3 anni dopo l'uscita di Found, l'artista degli effetti speciali Arthur Cullipher decide di trarre un vero e proprio lungometraggio che narra sia i suoi assassini sia la storia dell'infanzia, fatta ovviamente di abusi e soprusi. La grande riflessione di Found è indubbiamente quella sulle cause della violenza. All'inizio siamo turbati perché pare proprio che siano i film a scatenarla, come pensavano i nostri nonni e come pensano attualmente gli ignoranti. Ma poi tutto si svela, il razzismo e la violenza del padre vengono fuori e tutto diventa molto più chiaro. Forse motivazioni un po' blande, diciamo che psicologicamente in questo film è un po' impreciso, tutto c'entra anche, ma vabbè, ma non è questo l'obiettivo che vuole perseguire. Indubbiamente Found non vuole essere un film realistico, quanto più un'opera che discolpa il cinema horror e la musica pesante come cause di una violenza. Al massimo possono ispirarne l'estetica, ma quello che più conta è sempre la storia personale dell'individuo, espressa sicuramente meglio in Headless, attraverso la messa in scena di stereotipi realistici sugli assassini seriali. Anche il razzismo però pare una scusa per dare sfogo agli istinti violenti di Steve più che una causa scatenante. Difatti va detto che il crimine d'odio non dà la giustificazione alla violenza, ma una giustificazione. La violenza verrebbe comunque perpetrata anche senza coinvolgere una minoranza. I razzisti violenti sarebbero violenti anche se non fossero razzisti, insomma. Quella è una richiesta sociale e di appartenenza a un gruppo e una stupida giustificazione perché la violenza venga compiuta e ripetuta. Found è interessante perché è strutturato in modo da cambiare le nostre credenze. Ha un'ottima abilità nel raccontare, nonostante registicamente sia davvero poca roba. Sono convinto però che ogni appassionato di cinema horror rivedrà se stesso perché è una dichiarazione d'amore immensa al genere. Il piccolo Marty, nella sua fascinazione verso le teste mozzate, tanto da volerle toccare armato di guanti per le pulizie, rappresenta noi e il nostro rapporto con il macabro e con la nostra spiccata pulsione di morte, quanto ci piace sfogarla sullo schermo, insomma. Ovviamente è un'esagerazione anche questa, certo che ognuno di noi scapperebbe o rimarrebbe traumatizzato di fronte a una testa mozzata, ma l'immagine non è così tanto didascalica, ecco. E non mancano gli eccessi ovviamente tra teste decapitate usate per godere, bambini morti e via discorrendo, inseriti in maniera poco gratuita ma sempre molto funzionale. Headless, dall'altra parte, è un film sulla violenza di genere. Le vittime preferite del killer sono tutte donne che anche al di fuori vengono maltrattate. Sono vittime oltre l'assassinio e oltre l'abuso post-mortem. Ma di questo ne parliamo con Arthur Cullipher, che ha curato gli effetti speciali di Found e diretto Headless. Via con l'intervista.
So, first off, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm gonna do my best here.
Found è un film sulla passione per l'horror. Lo spettatore è esattamente il bambino protagonista del film. Cos'è per te l'horror?
If you look around, really, the horror genre is my life. It's that way ever since I was a little kid, really. You know, my father was big into horror movies when I was little. My first memory of a film at all is The Exorcist. I think it really got cemented when he used to love to go to these yard sales, garage sale type things. And I hated it as a kid, just boring. But this one, he ended up, I got a Wolfman mask, a werewolf mask, rubber mask. A copy of Fangoria was my first copy of Fangoria. It didn't have the cover on it. It did have a picture of Svengoolie, you know. And I got a copy of the Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology. So that kind of really set the course for my future with horror. Star Wars came along and there were all the creatures, and E.T. came along, all the creatures, and so it really led to a big love of monster movies and how to make monsters.
Come hai lavorato agli effetti speciali di Found e di Headless?
It was a lot of fun to work on the special effects. Found, for both Found and Headless, special effects is my life, you know. And Found was a lot different because when we went to make Found, you know, I had made a few movies with Scott Shermer. The first film that I was like really a part of, feature film, was House of Hope, and that was Scott Shermer's. And I read an article in a newspaper that he had put out for actors. And I called him up and I'm like, well, you know, I can act, but I can also do special effects. So if you need a special effects artist. And he was like, well, I don't know, I hadn't thought about it. But I ended up doing some work on House of Hope. I made Kirk Chastain appear older, although time enough has passed to see that I didn't make him look older. I just made him look like a burn victim. The Day Joe Left and Full Moon Sunny and short films, and then he helped me on The Adipseer Child, which was my directorial debut. We were just making the films maybe with a thought of showing them to other people, getting them in festivals, maybe, you know, getting taken seriously by Hollywood, I don't know, something. But I mean, that wasn't really the thought, I think, in the beginning. Once we made Found, we got together to make Found in about, I think, 2008. Scott moved to LA and was working out there. When he moved back to Indiana, he saw that we were still working on the stuff, and we in fact had started a film festival called Dark Carnival. But the point is that we had all kind of gotten away from each other and then came back together. And Scott was working at Author House, which was a self-publishing company. This book came across his desk, and usually the books that they got there are like, you know, a lot of self-help, a lot of religious God, Jesus books and stuff. He saw this book come across his desk that was just a black book with a skull and a box on it. And he was like, oh, what is this? And he read it and he fell in love with it. And he said, this is what I want to make. And so he had saved up, you know, about $8,000, and he pretty much funded that whole thing himself. A lot of fun. But like I said, when we were making Found, I don't think that we really knew that it was going to be, I mean, I think we knew it was going to be big in the horror community, in the indie horror community. But outside of that, you know, we didn't really have that much thought to it. My point in saying that is that the way that we worked with the special effects was a lot different. I worked with what I knew at the time. And one of the things is like the heads. I really wanted the heads to be very realistic and have some weight to them. We poured those heads up for Found out of solid prosthetic gelatin, so they were heavy. In fact, there was a scene that was fairly difficult where Marty has to hold his bully's head and show it to his friend. It was too heavy, and so the kid Gavin playing Marty couldn't hold it up. So I'm underneath there, like with my fist just kind of propping up. For Headless, it was a little different because initially we just were shooting, you know, a 20-minute film that was supposed to be very much like it was from the rough and ready 70s, you know, a very gritty slasher film that wasn't necessarily supposed to be realistic as much as it was supposed to gross you out. So we had a lot of fun with that. We made the eyeballs out of grapes, and, you know, Shane would put like milk powder in his mouth, or sometimes just straight milk in his mouth, and then when he bit on it, you know, it'd come out. As challenging as it was, just really a lot of fun, at least for me. In fact, I played a police officer in the original cut of that, and I guess we'll talk more about that here in a bit. The funniest scene to shoot in Found, for me, probably was when Steve has to come around the corner with his fucking hell boner. We had got a dildo, and I cut it in half, and I made this wire rig that went up between his legs and around his waist so that we could fit this dick on there. And that worked out great, but once it got bloody, the cone became very slippery, and it kept wanting to slip off of the wire. That was kind of funny because it kept going to the thump plump. Okay, hang on here. I got to put it back on you here. Oh, thump plop. Okay, hang on. So we're doing that, and then the power goes out, and it's completely dark, and then all you hear is thud. So I don't know. At the moment, that was pretty funny to me. My favorite scene from Found is definitely the inside of train yard, junkyard place where they went. Man, that place is cool. It's a real haunted train museum people the Bakers have at Baker's Junction in Indiana. The guy initially intended on making a train museum, but he got a lot of flack from his neighbors, and he was actually there first, saying these things were an eyesore and whatever, so he ended up just buying every piece of rusted farm machinery and crazy, you know, weird thing that he could put on his property, and then of course got more train cars. And so along the way he collected a ton of Halloween memorabilia that is just kind of set up all through. It's my favorite haunted house so far. So,
come ti è venuto in mente di girare un film completo da Headless?
I was working in an adult bookstore at the time, overnights, and I wrote a novella called Smut, and had decided to turn it into a script. I started writing it thinking, you know, I hadn't written anything for a while that wasn't specifically for the screen, so I wanted to, you know, just write something to write it. But by the time I was done, I'm like, nah, I want to make this into a movie. I had started working on the script. Scott, in the meantime's like, well, do you want to direct Headless? I came home one day, it's like, you want to direct Headless? I said, yeah, yes, I do. Yeah, I do. The reason for that, though, is because it was absolutely the most popular thing, or the thing that everybody was talking about when Found was making the rounds on the festival circuit. Everyone's like, when are we going to see a full version of Headless? That's what we did. We decided to get together, get everybody involved we had made movies with before, and sit everybody down. This is when we formed, essentially, Forbidden Films. We all sat around and basically gave our ideas what we thought Headless should be. Kara and Nathan took the script and wrote up what we have now.
Per il killer di Headless, ti sei ispirato a qualche serial killer realmente esistente o esistito?
I wouldn't say that, at least for me, that the Headless Killer was necessarily inspired by any real life serial killer. Nobody of note, nobody, to name specifically. Now, Nathan and Kara may have an entirely different idea about that. Shane may have a different idea about that, or something he had in his mind when he was playing it. For me, the main drive was that I wanted this, to seem like the real deal from 1978. Headless was intended to be, a slasher from 1978 specifically because that's what we said in Found, and I wanted it to be an authentic artifact. In the writing of it, one of the things that people tend to, critique it for is that he seems to be in this cycle where he cuts off somebody's head, he goes home and screams and cries, Skullboy says, hey, we gotta do another one, and then he goes back out and cuts off somebody's head, eats the eyes, fucks the head, does the same, 4 or 5 times in the movie. I enjoy that. I know that that's a point of contention for some people, but that's the part where I would say, if you were really a serial killer and you were really disturbed by a young phantasm of maybe yourself or whatever kind of guiding ghost that is telling you to do these things, it probably would seem very monotonous, especially if you didn't really want to and something was just wrong with your brain that kept making you have to do this, or you were possessed by some supernatural entity that made you keep having to do this specific thing over and over and over again. So that is something that I wanted to convey with that.
Found parlava anche di razzismo, mentre Headless di violenza di genere. Quanto è utile la violenza per far comprendere determinati messaggi alla gente?
I'm not certain how useful violence necessarily is to get across certain messages, although honestly I think at a certain point it's the only thing that violent people understand. I will say that it's interesting the way that these questions are worded. Found was about racism, was also about racism, while Headless was about gender violence. And to that end, I'm not sure that we were really considering that when we were making it. Now, certainly the racism was on our minds for Found, because actually if you read the book, Steve pretty much solely kills black women, and that's something that we say in the beginning of the movie, but you don't see that play out. You see one head. I think that it's kind of humorous, because another thing that you could say that it was about, and that people have said it was about, is homophobia, because we use derogative terms, certainly terms that I was called most of my life. I think it's funny when people say something. I mean, it is one thing to say that, yes, it talks about racism. It absolutely does. And it talks about the toxicity of having those sort of thoughts in your family and in your house, In the end, the people who come up and say, well, this is just racist and homophobic, and I don't really get that, because while there are those things, that's the bad guys. That's Steve and his dad and the bullies at school, I don't really understand. It's like, did you want to like them? Did you want to like the villain? Because the villain is racist. That's just the way it is. So I don't know that makes the film racist. Young Marty isn't, but it certainly shows how things can lead down a certain path. With Headless being about gender violence, I'm not disagreeing. It's only that is the general tone of slasher films in 1978. I think that the major thing about it was to make it as authentic as possible. So we cut off some peen in there too. We had to give a little equal airtime. I enjoy the discussion around them. I love to read people's critiques. You know, Found was on Shudder for, I have that app, so I was able to go through and read all the comments and things, positive or negative, it really doesn't matter to me. I just love the discussion around it.
Bellissima la fossa comune dove l'assassino nasconde le sue vittime. Complimenti, è stata difficile da realizzare?
So, thank you very much about the body pit. It's not that it was really difficult to realize. I was very fortunate to have a friend, Sam Sturgeon, who was also a special effects artist and had some property. And he had these old, like, cattle stalls. So what we did is we picked one of these cattle stalls, basically like a big box. And prior to shooting, I had him go in there and build like the hill, you know. And then we came in there pretty much the day before we shot, put up cardboard and sprayed everything down with spray foam and put plastic all over everything and heat gunned it so it shrank up against everything, and then covered it in mud and blood and brought in the bodies and covered them in mud and blood and slime. And so the most difficult thing is that once you get to a certain point of you've got everything covered in plastic and mud and blood and slime, it's very, very slippery. And it was cold, pretty freezing on that night. So I was, again, very fortunate to have people willing to get naked. We did have some live bodies in there, naked in the freezing cold. Just tons of, you know, PVC dummy bodies in there as well. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. I wouldn't say that it was, again, difficult to realize, but because it was so slippery, we had a couple of issues. One is that there's a certain scene where the killer is chasing the hitchhiker up the hill. She hits him with a leg, and then he falls backwards on his butt. Well, Shane did this a couple of times, and when he did it the final time, which actually is the version that we used in the film, because we're not going to not after this, but he fell back, and we had dulled the machete, but not the point of it, and so he fell back, dug the machete handle into the ground, and came around and hit his hand, just the way that he flopped there, hit his hand onto the tip of the machete and cut himself. Finished the scene like a trooper, and then as soon as we yelled cut, it was, you know, I need a Band-Aid, I need a medic, you know. So we got his hand taken care of, and we wanted to be careful because, again, it's a cattle barn and there's a chance for some, you know, stuff. But we took him right to the house, and everybody followed him to the house and left Leah on top of the body pile, which was very slippery, and she had the camera, so there was no way that she could get down. That was funny and difficult. So those were the main difficulties of it, was that Leah couldn't get down and Shane cut himself. But nothing too serious. We kept going and shot the next day, so everybody was cool.
Il bambino che interpreta il killer da giovane sta bene?
Yes, the child who played the young killer is okay. Same guy who played Skullboy, the skeleton child. I don't have a lot of contact with them at this point, but he was the son of a friend of Shane's. And so when I met him, I talked with his dad about it, and one of the main things that made me say, yeah, this kid, is that he was already on the football team. So I'm thinking he's coachable. He's used to wearing something weird on his head that maybe he's, you know, kind of obstructs his vision a little bit. And he's used to being out in the cold and the wet and the rain and running around and not going to have a problem. That wasn't an issue at all. Dad or his parents were, you know, there throughout the shoot, and he never really saw any of the like gore. We filmed his scenes pretty separate. And to be honest, he wasn't going to see much anyway with that Skullboy mask on. You got two little slits right here that he could see through, you know. He's doing all right. And also, you know, as far as Olivia goes, Olivia is another one that had already been in another film that I had worked on. She was very sweet and understanding, and again, never really saw any sort of gore or anything like that. The most she did was she had the blood on the stuffed bunny head, you know.
Parlaci del bambino scheletro, credo sia la cosa più inquietante di tutte.
The skeleton child, which we lovingly refer to as Skull Boy. And no, we never were going to use that. Some people, I've heard people say, thank goodness they didn't call him that in the movie. We weren't going to use that in the movie because, I mean, it's really the young killer, or maybe some, you know, strange spirit that possessed him from that point. I'll leave that up to you. But Skullboy showed up pretty much fully formed, like I said, when we were all sitting around together trying to figure out what this movie was going to be. We were trying to think, well, what do you want to see? And one of the things that came up, I think Scott mentioned that he wanted to see a boy in a cage, or, you know, young killer in a cage. That thought kind of germinated, I guess, in my brain, and as we're sitting out on the back porch, I just kind of had this vision of the little boy in the skull mask, or maybe with just a skull head, crawling out of the woods over to his cave, or to his cage. And I guess in my brain it was kind of like, for some reason, they were cooking outside or something, I don't know. Skullboy crawled out of the woods and right up to our young killer's cage and gave the clack clack, you know, click clack. He's one of those things that I kind of consider more of a real thing than something that I invented. You know, it just kind of came out fully formed. I said, this is what I want, let's put him in. And I'm glad that Skullboy is in Headless.
Parlaci del resto della tua carriera, film passati, prossimi progetti.
So I have directed 3 shorts and 1 feature film so far. So my 3 shorts, which can all be found on YouTube under the Clockwork Pictures, are The Adipocere Child, which is about a cult known as the Temple of the Doll that conjures a spirit into a pile of rags and sends that spirit out to capture a baby every year and put it in the ground and turn it into a wax baby that gets dug up the next year and helps the initiates of the Temple of the Doll become something else. And then the second one is called Come, C-O-M-E, and it's about a sort of rogue doctor who has this, he's a serial killer. He has this sort of fetish for cutting off women's vulvas and sewing it to their faces in worship of this strange god that seems to demand this to help bring forth other creatures into this realm. That was 2009, and then in 2010 we did Roses, which was The Adipocere Child and Come were both written by me. Roses was not written by me as part of our like I said, we did Dark Carnival Film Festival. We did that for about 10 years, and one year we decided to have a screenwriting competition, with the prize being that we would make the short film, you know, and then that it would air at the festival. And so that's what Roses is. All 3 of those, the sound quality is not great, but they are on YouTube under Clockwork Pictures, so check those out. Like I said, I wrote Smut, which is about a gentleman who works overnight at a haunted porn store, where the arcade customers, the glory hole booth customers, are working to bring forth the same god that we're talking about from the past, you know, couple of movies. So they're all kind of tied together, and I still intend on making that. Right now, I am in Florida taking care of my aging mother, whom I love dearly. Full-time elder care is no joke. So right now my filmmaking endeavors have been put on hold for the moment. But there are many things, including a Mothman film called Shriek, a Flatwoods monster film called Space Witch. I've got a stop motion film that I won't talk too much about, but might involve some of my characters. This here's Mr. Mojo. He's not in the movie, but He's just somebody I like to hang out with. So my film projects, while there are many, are put on hold for the moment. So what I have been focusing on recently is music. I've created a band, loose term, it's me and my dolls banging on stuff, you know. Anyway, it's called Spindlebone, and it's kind of a tribal, industrial, occult, lo-fi sort of thing that's meant to really facilitate the work, facilitate writing or magic or whatever you're doing that you've got some sort of strange noise going on in the background. That's what Spindlebone is.
3 film che hanno scioccato te e magari i tuoi gusti cinematografici, le tue ispirazioni, i tuoi registi preferiti.
I am estranged from both my father and my son. I don't think I'm that bad of a guy, but you know, things happen. Anyway, the point is that I have a real personal problem with anything happening between a father and a son. The movies that shocked me aren't really maybe what you would expect. It's not that they're the goriest films or anything, because I'm a special effects artist. You'd have a hard time, you know. But Pan's Labyrinth, there's the scene where the main Nazi villain kills the father and son together and kills the son in front of the father. You know, Killer Joe, the ending of Killer Joe, where the dad's like, "Kill him, Joe, kill him," you know. And 3, you know, on a different note, but still like family strangeness. I'm gonna have to go with Possessor. Possessor is a disturbing film by Brandon Cronenberg. David Cronenberg being one of my favorite directors of all time, and his son is no slouch. So Possessor has a lot of possibility for betrayal in a family dynamic. Let's put it that way. Of course, there's other kinds of betrayal. I mean, I think it's largely about betrayal, which is always something that disturbs me. Yeah, some of my favorite directors, I mean, again, David Cronenberg and David Lynch are probably right up there at the top for me. Although there's some new folks coming on the scene. I mean, I'm still gonna, you know, always have love for John Carpenter and Stuart Gordon, and I mean, honestly, just you know, strive to make films like them, and pray that eventually I might get to the level of not just horror but disturbing that Cronenberg and Lynch have. You know, I've seen in a couple of interviews now where they've kind of confused Nathan Erdell and myself, where they will say that you know, he was more of the monster kid and I was more into slashers from the 70s. And I have to say it's definitely the opposite. I love slashers. I'm pretty much all horror. I mean, but I definitely have more of a predilection towards the creature films. You know, for me, it's always going to be Pumpkinhead and Gremlins and scarecrows and monster movies. You know. Now, that's not to say that, especially with some of the newer slasher horror, or even if you could call it that, as long as it's got a sort of mystical element to it or some strange art, I'm probably gonna love it. I really loved the first season of True Detective. I thought was fantastic. Which of course relied heavily on one of my favorite authors, Thomas Ligotti's work, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. But also Hannibal, the Hannibal TV series with Will's Moth. God, I love that thing. If you know, you know. Even with the guinea pig films, like the guinea pig experiments, my favorite was still Mermaid in a Manhole. because it had a mermaid, but also, boy, that thing's gross. Love it.
Grazie mille ad Arthur per questa intervista, è stato davvero un onore averlo ospite qui con noi a Cinema degli Eccessi, ma torniamo a noi. Se ti sono piaciuti Found ed Headless, devi assolutamente guardare My Friend Dahmer, tratto dalla graphic novel di un amico di infanzia del cannibale di Milwaukee, il recente Megalomaniac, che abbiamo messo nella top degli eccessi del 2023, e Manhunter, perché semplicemente è troppo bello, anche se ci azzecca poco con Found e con Headless. Ed eccoci con la scheda del film. Budella 4 su 5, poche scene ma veramente sanguinolente. Per Headless 5 su 5, è portato molto più all'eccesso. Violenza psicologica 2 su 5, il giusto per un film simile, idem Headless. Marciume 3 su 5, fottere una testa mozzata fa sempre il suo effetto, e 4 su 5 per Headless, decisamente più disgustoso. Weird 3 su 5 a tutti e due per questa stramba atmosfera che riescono a creare. Trash facciamo un 2 su 5 sempre a tutti e due, involontaria e causata da una recitazione abbastanza imbarazzante. Facendo la media tra i due film, Found di Scott Skirmer e Headless di Arthur Cullipher segnano un 68%. Siamo abituati a roba ben peggiore. E anche oggi abbiamo concluso. Io vi saluto. Bella regà, che il cinema sia con voi. Nella prossima puntata di Cinema degli Eccessi. Così con la testa fluttuante nel nulla vi dico che nella prossima puntata di Cinema degli Eccessi vediamo il film migliore dell'anno scorso. Sarà una recensione veloce di un film che esce al cinema proprio giovedì, un'opera assurda, incredibile, che è appunto la mia preferita del 2023.